My name is Vijay Vishwanathan, and I'm a professor and associate dean in the Integrated Marketing Communications Department at Medill. I am grateful and glad that you could join us today for the second edition of the IMC C-Suite webinar. Leadership has never been more important. Corporate leaders are facing enormous challenges as they navigate the pandemic, identify and share their brand purpose, encounter an endless flow of technological disruptions, and of course, the great resignation. We are seeing small startups take leadership positions and take on the Goliaths of their industries. Similarly, we are seeing leaders of small states battling for attention and resources. And more recently, we see a state in Eastern Europe led by an inspirational leader who's keen to stay on the front lines and take on a much bigger neighbor. In today's session, I'm keen to hear the personal stories of leadership from our august panel of industry executives. I am sure we will come away from this conversation with nuggets of wisdom and stories that inspire us to put our best foot forward. I'm keen to hear their vision of the future and what it takes to drive growth and lead in a competitive marketplace. IMC has never been just about marketing communications. In fact, IMC is all about attaining a leadership position in the marketplace driven by deep insight and aligning the organization to drive long-term value. I will now hand over the webinar to my dear colleague, Neil Golden, who's the Director for Experiential Learning and IMC Employer Engagement. Once again, thank you from the department.
Vijay, thank you. It's a delight to be here. I appreciate the confidence in being able to host this type of a session. And I'm just excited about getting right into it. We have a group of individuals that are all from very different backgrounds, professionally, personally, but the one thing that they have in common is extraordinary success, both in their roles, but for the companies that they lead. And much of the leadership reference that Vijay made, you're going to see evident in each one of the panelists tonight. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Ed Bourelly, the Vice President for Planet Fitness Holdings, based here in Chicago. I'd also like to introduce Sanjiv Gajiwala, who is the U.S. Chief Growth Officer for Kraft Heinz. Dave Kimbell, who is the Chief Executive Officer. Deep down, he is a marketing guy in his marketing roots, but he is now the CEO for one of the largest, most successful retailers in the US, which is Ulta Beauty. And Alyssa Raine, who is a Senior Vice President of Brand Marketing for Walgreens. It is absolutely a delight to be able to have you all together. I've had the privilege of working with you in one way, shape, or form over a number of years. And this is really an extraordinary group to have together. So what I'd like to do is just ask each one of you, and I'm going to start in reverse order now. Alyssa, if you could just do a quick introduction of yourself, just a little bit of the professional, but also a little bit beyond the professional, so that the audience knows who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So Alyssa Raine, thrilled to be here tonight. Go Wildcats. I have been at Walgreens for 4 years. Before that, did more CPG, mostly on the PepsiCo side of the house, as well as 2 startups. And I live here in Chicago, and I have 3 kids. And so when I'm not working, I'm running around after them, which is a whole second job. But love partnering with Neil, love when we work with the students at Northwestern in this program, and thrilled to be here tonight.
Thank you. Dave.
Great. I too am really excited to be here. Thanks, Neil, for bringing this group together and looking forward to a great conversation. I am, as Neil said, CEO of Ulta Beauty. I've been with the company for about 8 years, first as Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Merchandising Officer, and then I stepped into this role about 6, 7 months ago, last June. Most of my career was also, like Alyssa, in CPG at Procter & Gamble and also at Pepsi here in Chicago in the Quaker division, and then spent a few years at US Cellular in marketing and merchandising roles before joining Ulta. I live right here in Evanston, not too far from Northwestern's campus, so close to campus, and nice to be connected to that. I've got 2 kids, both in college actually, and just really excited to be here tonight.
Yeah, and everybody, you should know, Dave was sort of rallying for an opportunity to do this in person. We all agreed, but of course, at the time that we had to schedule this, this was at the peak of Omicron. So one of these days, Dave, we're going to get you on campus and we're going to do something like this again. So
well, I can walk there from my house, so that makes
even better, even better. Yeah. That means for me, it's like a driver.
Yeah.
A driver with an errant hook to the left.
Yeah.
Sanjiv.
I have no golf references. I'm Sanjiv Gajiwala. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Kraft Heinz. I'm super excited to be here. I had such great experiences with IMC teams, both in this and my previous role. I've been with Kraft just over 18 months, where I'm responsible for helping to transform our marketing and think differently about how we reach consumers. And prior to that, I spent 9 years at Mark Anthony Brands, most recently as Chief Marketing Officer, where I launched White Claw Hard Seltzer and led the marketing for Mike's Hard Lemonade, among other things.
Great. And you have how many little people running around?
Personally speaking, I forgot the personal note, but I have 1 3-year-old and 1 6-month-old puppy. At the beginning of the pandemic, I had 1 1-year-old and no puppy. So my life has dramatically taken a turn for the worse. But thrilled to be here and glad to have this time with you all, and no puppy and no toddler.
Great, thank you. And Ed.
Ed Bourelly, VP of Marketing at Planet Fitness. I've been in marketing for 25 years. Prior to Planet Fitness, worked for a number of lifestyle brands. So I was with Nike for several years, Levi's, and then I ran all of a retail brand for New Era, the hat company. I also was on the agency side, worked with McDonald's, Taco Bell, Eastman Kodak was a bustling company at the time. So I am a pure marketer. I've been doing it for a long time. Chicago native. I grew up here on the south side of the city. Live in Oak Park now with 2 daughters, and I too succumbed to the pandemic puppy. Glutton for punishment. But just happy to be here. I love Northwestern, even though I didn't go to school. We support Northwestern's athletics. So I get out to a lot of games, and I love being a part of this.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're going to jump into the questions. I just wanted to let everybody know who's on the phone or who's on the webinar that I would encourage you to please submit questions via the chat. I'll be monitoring that fairly closely. Of course, I have a few questions just to get the conversation going, but this is really a conversation and an opportunity to engage with any and all of the panelists on any topic that you're interested in discussing with them. So looking forward to that. But let me just start, and this is really about the first point I think I'd like to direct actually to Alyssa. There were a number of milestone experiences that you've had throughout your career that has put you in a position to succeed the way that you have. I'd love to hear what some of those milestone experiences were.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a massive fan of taking risks because I think if you jump into a business or a brand that isn't doing well and figure out how to turn it around and drive growth, and that's a good thing. So one of the key ones was lead Tostitos. We've been down 4 years in a row. And we, at the time, we're talking about like cornfields and 3 simple ingredients. And that's not why somebody buys a unflavored tortilla chip. So repositioned it around Party and Cantina, which was authentic for the Tostitos brand, and drove 7% of growth off of $1 billion brand the year after the repositioning. However, then I took a risk and I decided, Fiesta Bowl, big commercials wasn't what was driving the growth of my competitors that were trying to grab share. And so I moved to San Francisco and did startup. Next to zero budget, but worked at Hint Water and was able to reposition it as a mainstream brand, worked directly for the founder, got to do investor relations and driving seed money. And it was a whole other learning, launched direct to consumer and not through Amazon, but through actually owning that customer experience. So got to learn how to do direct to consumer when it was a new thing. And then took another risk. I went from Hint to Hallmark, which is about the opposite of a startup direct-to-consumer brand, but really learned how can you leverage digital tools to drive relevance of a new brand. And then with Walgreens is my first pure retail experience, and being able to take a brand that I've always loved, but that needs help sometimes in terms of brand relevancy and has a business model that's constantly challenged, and figure out how to drive growth there. So I think for me, I'm always looking at what's the next challenge, and then, and then jumping in. And it's not the career advice everybody gives, but I rarely say no when I'm asked to join a new project, whether it's within marketing or typically not, because it's always a way to learn outside of my current role, and something that I think has helped me drive my career in ways that I couldn't have otherwise. And sometimes those projects, they're typically not the ones that land on my resume or LinkedIn profile, but they are the ones that get me the learning and exposure to then jump into my next thing.
Yeah, so Alyssa, I have to ask you as a clarity point, where were you in your career when you took that first risk with Tostitos in terms of the repositioning?
I was pretty early. I was a brand manager. I started the role as a brand manager, and then was promoted as brand manager doing a director role while they were trying to fill the director role, and then was promoted in role, which typically didn't happen. And the exposure that I got was insane. I was in front of the CEO in meetings that typically it had to be a senior director to be able to attend, and I was presenting. So massive risk early in my career, but just going after it, I think, helped differentiate me compared to other great talent internally at PepsiCo. So
that's great.
I loved it.
Thank you, Dave. I'd like to turn to you on this. I mean, you've, like Alyssa, had multiple company experiences and progression in each one. But I'd love to hear some of the milestone experiences that ultimately helped you succeed, not only as a CMO but as a CEO.
Yeah, as Alyssa was describing that, a lot of parallels and similarities. The idea of a collection of experiences that come together, and I'm guessing, Alyssa, none of that was mapped out. You didn't have, a 20-year plan that said, here are all the steps I'm going to take or whatever. And same for me. And I think, the milestones, but by leaning in and taking advantage of whatever opportunity is out there, both internally within your organization, leaning in, taking, raising your hand, taking part of new things or risk or driving things forward or else great, or sometimes, finding new experiences. So for me, actually, I go all the way back. I started out of undergrad in banking. I was a commercial lender for 5 years. I didn't know, I had nothing about marketing. I didn't have any. They weren't even really on my radar at that point. But it turned out to be a great place to start because it gave me a foundation in financial understanding. I spent the first couple of years there as a credit analyst, commercial credit analyst, just studying financial statements. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but that has carried me through really my whole career. Went back to school and then made the pivot into marketing and loved it. And that, these experiences, these collection experiences, first at Procter & Gamble and a variety of different things, reaching into new opportunities, had similar experience of taking a brand, Noxzema, and rethinking the entire brand, relaunching it, some new extensions on that was just pivotal in my development and growth, and just understanding consumer landscape and how you build brands and understand consumer behavior and innovate and drive creativity, even on a brand that you might not think is the most exciting brand in the space. Moved to Pepsi, which was awesome, very different than P&G in many ways, but equally as exciting, and really developed through a lot of different experiences. But I also took a leap, leaving Pepsi to go to a small company, 7th Generation, out in Burlington, Vermont, if you know that brand. So similar experience with Alyssa, and I think it was great because I went from P&G and Pepsi to huge companies, very well established, great training grounds for marketing and brand building and development, to then being in a small team in a small company that was founder led and trying to lean in. That was actually my first CMO role, And that it was a big stretch, and I grew a ton. I learned a lot. When you're surrounded in these big companies by a lot of experiences and resources, it's much different. And that I look back at that as like I grew a lot in a relatively short period of time, and then went into a totally different category in wireless, which is very heavily marketed. And you think you can't turn on the TV without Verizon or AT&T, so heavy marketing, but totally different category and dynamics. So to learn and just stretch yourself, to try new things and learn, and just continuous learning through these new experiences. And then do my first retail experience was at Ulta 8 years ago, and I've just been growing and learning and continue to learn. So I think the theme is just try new things, experimenting, pushing yourself, taking risk, and the collection of those experiences ultimately, I think, have allowed me to have some success, and I think have positioned me to, in the role that I'm in today.
That's fantastic. So I'm going to pause here for a moment because we're having some questions from some of the participants. The first one is a general one, and any one of you can take it. So I'm going to throw this really to Sanjiv and then to Ed. It appears as if you have one primary competitor in your respective areas. And just curious, how are you thinking about managing the competition and then also competing against other smaller niche brands, particularly given the experiences that both Alyssa and Dave referenced? So Sanjiv, to you.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think the way we think about, I'm actually most excited that Dave spent time in Vermont because my wife's from Shelburne, so I'm eager to trade notes on Lake Champlain if you'd like at some point. But I think the interesting thing at Kraft Heinz is the portfolio is very broad, right? We're 50 brands, 50 categories, and we cover every meal day part from breakfast all the way through to dessert at the end of the night. So we have significant competitors of a variety of shapes. There's private label in some of the more commodity-driven categories like meats and cheeses, and then we have insurgents and startups in snacking where there's lower barriers to entry, and then we've got significantly entrenched competitors in macro categories like coffee and places like that. And so, for us, the approach is thinking first about the consumer and their needs and spending a lot of time trying to find and fit the solutions to what the consumer is doing and where they're evolving and where they're going. And then the second one is to make sure that we keep an external mindset. I think one of the things that can happen when you're in a category-driven or a commodity-driven space is that you end up just being really focused on the fundamentals of your business, which are critical, but I think you end up losing sight of the big picture. And so for us as an organization, that's one of the challenges and one of the things that we try to do, which is to say, are we looking outside of ourselves? Are we meeting the consumer where they are? And then how do we think about that challenge? Because the way that we're going to win against a single competitor like private label, or the way that we're going to react against the multitude of disruptors in our categories, is by moving faster, thinking about things differently, and leveraging what we know about consumers across categories to bring different solutions.
That's great. Thank you. Ed?
Yeah, I'm kind of in a unique situation now. Throughout my career, we did always have that one competitor. I was at Nike, it was Adidas, Levi's, it was Wrangler. Planet Fitness, even though it's a national brand, it really doesn't have a big national competitor that we're going up against. I mean, it's a very hyper local brand. So we have a number of regional players, some brands that are nationally known. So we really don't have that one national competitor, which is a first for me in my career. But in terms of, so I don't look and focus on the competition that much. It's really just focusing on who we're talking to, who we're trying to reach, obsessing over the consumer. That's the thing that I'm focused on more so than really looking at competitive set that we have in the market. Of course, on a smaller level, we do have competitors that are very aggressive in doing some amazing things that you always have to keep an eye on and make sure you're ahead of the curve in terms of what's happening. But the key is really to focus on your consumer and what's driving them in the marketplace.
That's great. Thank you. So hearing quite a bit about, what I would describe as competitively aware but consumer driven
Yes.
in both Sanjiv's and Ed's answers here. I have one in particular for Alyssa, and Alyssa, this is from actually a student that was part of an immersion quarter experience at Walgreens a couple of years ago. And the question is, knowing that their goal was to help transition into My Walgreens and make the My Walgreens experience feel more local to customers. Looking back, what is it that you believe CMOs today can do to help your brand or their brands stay relevant and feel connected to customers in their markets?
Well, we got some smart students out there. That's a doozy of a question. So first of all, for those of you who don't know My Walgreens, it's our customer engagement platform, which is a fancy way to say that we have evolved and modernized our loyalty program, which used to be Balanced Rewards, into how can we have authenticated, personalized experiences, whether you're logging into your My Walgreens account on your phone, which is your app, or in store. We're at over 95 million members. So sorry, I just had to do my woo woo because we weren't sure. Launched in November 2020. You're always crossing your fingers, but we're at 95 million now. Local is extremely important to us, and it's important for the Walgreens brand in particular because a lot of healthcare is local. And it's interesting because I spent a lot of my time talking with people that really understand healthcare and what drives it being local. And it's a lot of your healthcare systems that help make it, extremely important that your healthcare is local. From a community perspective, I mean, it's everything. We continuously look at how can we serve all of our local communities, especially in communities in which there may be underserved in the healthcare space. And it's important to us that in those underserved communities, we're doing everything to make health as accessible as possible, as in communities that Northwestern's a great health community, right? Southside Chicago doesn't have, well, they have University of Chicago too, competitor, sorry, but there's a lot of communities that are underserved in the healthcare space. And so it's important for us that we're unlocking access to healthcare locally, and then that we're giving back locally too. So for My Walgreens, and I hope you all download the app and have it, but you can donate your Walgreens cash to local charities, which is something that we've never had in the past. So being able to donate your Walgreens cash rewards, but also not just to national organizations. We've always had Red Nose Day and Vitamin Angels and others, but to local charities that will help improve your local community. And we continue to look at what are the ways that we can leverage digital tools like we do with the local charities in our partnership with Impact, that you can do directly from your app. But then how are we also leveraging the stores and our team members in our stores who live in the communities, care about the communities, and want to take care of their communities? And how can we unlock that further with things like clinical trials, which traditionally have been accessible only to your communities that are closer to healthcare systems versus your communities that may be underserved, which means that their unique healthcare needs may not be met. So the lot of answers, I don't know the answer to your question because it's very complicated and we're continuing to work on it, but that's the crux of community, of health, and we continue to work at it. So thank you for supporting us during your immersion quarter, and Walgreens is hiring, so.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you. Hey, Ed, you're leading the marketing effort for Planet Fitness in multiple markets. So you obviously have a brand framework, but that brand framework, there's some consistent elements of that brand framework in every single market in which you operate.
Yep.
But you're also taking a very localized approach that helps tailor that experience. Is there anything you could add to make sure that the brand is staying, the brand's connection is strong with customers in the markets where you're operating?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to what the purpose of the brand is, right? And what you want to represent the brand as. As you mentioned, we're very hyper local, and I'm not talking about from just a city, but down to a community, down to a neighborhood. our brand is. So it's staying true to the pillars that the brand has in place. You know, we're the judgment-free zone, so making sure that's always at the forefront and that our proposition is accessible and open to everybody. You know, that's the key part of our brand identity and making sure we're driving that. And then the rest is about just entrenching ourselves in these communities, whether it's working with the local schools, you know, working with the local fire departments, the chambers of commerce. I mean, every community wants brands to respect what the community stands for and how people relate to each other. And when we build our gyms in these communities, we want to make sure we're a part of that and we're helping empower people to have better fitness, better wellness overall. So just stay true to your brand pillars no matter what.
Perfect, thanks. Hey, Dave, I'd like to ask you a question. This is from the chat, and this is from Bree Sandak. Given the shift to e-commerce, particularly during the pandemic, and I don't want to suggest that this was started by the pandemic, by the way, how is it that you see the beauty industry adjusting to consumer trends as we continue to navigate an unsafe world? And specifically, how can brands best navigate these trends in, how can marketing leaders navigate these trends as they progress in their career?
Well, you're right, of course, that the world was shifting pretty dramatically well before COVID. The way consumers want to engage with retail and brands in general, and I'm sure, Ed, on your businesses, I mean, there's a shift going on, but pandemic changed everything for us, both personally, professionally, and certainly as we think about how we reach and connect with our guests. In our case, our e-commerce business was strong going into the pandemic. It doubled in 2020 because, in part, because we had to close our stores for several months, and we were fortunate to have a strong connection, strong loyalty. It pivoted our business. It really pushed us, like so many other, really probably every other company and certainly every other retailer, in thinking about how do we accelerate some of the things we're doing to provide different ways for our guests to engage with us. And so certainly through commerce, so commerce components, e-commerce is continuing to grow for us. We offer programs like probably most other retailers in curbside, leveraging our app, our other capabilities to reach and be able to deliver and service for our guests in ways that felt comfortable and safe to them. But I'd say, now as we look at the world and certainly through 2021 and as we move into this year, what's really interesting is the increased connection that we see between all that we offer to our guests. And what I mean by that is stores are coming back even stronger. We're seeing a strong level of traffic, a desire to come in and experience physical retail. And we're in a great category in beauty. I know, Alyssa, you're partially in beauty among many other things, so you probably see some of this too. But the desire to touch and feel and smell and explore and discover beauty in our environment, we're encouraged by the fact that people do want to come into our stores. In fact, one thing that's probably most encouraging for us as we do research among all different consumers, Gen Z, the youngest consumers, actually, when we ask them, they are most interested of all gauges of shopping in physical environment for beauty. And that may be a little counterintuitive because I know I've got two teenagers and they're, of course, everything's digital for them. But for some categories, and certainly in our category, the desire to still get out and discover and be in person, have human experiences, have human connections is so important. We also have salons in our stores, and you can't do that online. You can't get your hair cut, colored, or your brows done, or skin services. And so for us going forward, it will always be a connection to safety. We've elevated that like everybody has, and that's going to stay even as the world continues to open up and people are more comfortable, and maybe we're shifting into a new phase of this disruption, hopefully going forward, that's a better phase. So safety will will continue to be on our minds. But we've just tried to stay close to our guests throughout all of this to figure out what's important to them, pivot all of our experiences, our communication, reinforce what's important to them, and make sure that we're delivering for our guests. So when we look forward, we see a world in which it's not so much about which channel. Are they shopping online? Are they shopping in stores? Are they getting our services? Are they on our app? But a holistic customer view of individual customer view, and then serving them in multiple ways. The last thing I'd say that we, through the pandemic, and this is not something that we had planned, but it's an example of how we've tried to pivot our business to respond to changing consumer behaviors. We launched a partnership with Target that we have Ulta Beauty experiences inside now 100. We're opening another 250 this year. And that was really a response to consumer understanding in ways that we want to be able to deliver our guests whenever, wherever it's convenient and easy for them. We found when we do that, they respond with loyalty and greater connection to Ulta, and that'll be our focus going forward.
That's great. Thank you.
And Dave, you hit right on it. E-commerce is constantly evolving. It's been accelerated because of this pandemic, but it's about experiences, right? Experience online, how you interact with the brand physically. Nothing can replace your physical experience when you walk into a retailer. You're interacting with somebody who knows the product. You're trying the product on, you're touching it, you're smelling it. That can't be replaced by e-commerce. So it's all becoming part of the overall consumer experience that the brands have to develop, make sure it's seamless, and make sure that it's all about the customer.
That's great. Thank you. Hey, Sanjiv, there's a question about media that I'd like to turn to you if I could. And just for background, Sanjiv, you may recall that you and I had some conversations about media trends, media pain points that you were experiencing, certainly in your current role, but what you also experienced at the Mark Anthony Group. So the question is, with traditional media advertising becoming less effective and more eyeballs spent more on lower funnel tactics, how are you managing your advertising budget in a world of hyper targeting and media fragmentation? And I just want to underscore something Sanjiv said earlier to everybody who's on the call. Kraft Heinz is a very, very large company. It's got multiple brands. There's a few huge, well-established brands, but there's also many smaller brands that have to make every, not just dollar, but every penny work. And I know that that's something that Sanjiv is exceptional at. So Sanjiv, I'd love to hear your perspective on the question.
Yeah, I think, hearing the conversation from everyone else about the rise of e-commerce is one that actually significantly affects our strategy, right? Because we have partners like Walgreens and Walmart and Target and others that are now advertisers. And so we're in a landscape where we have, linear TV and traditional media that are in decline. We have partners that were traditionally channel partners that are now selling advertising. We have a change in even hyper targeting and fragmentation when you think about Apple's changes to its privacy ecosystem, a cookieless world, European privacy rules. California has new rules that they're considering on children's privacy and marketing. And so even the construct of hyper targeting versus traditional is one that I think is continuing to evolve, because it's really about figuring out how to do both the brand media that you traditionally used to do from an advertising construct and the performance marketing that you might do in an e-commerce or a conversion or funnel-based construct, and finding a way to connect those. And I'm super envious of Alyssa's 95 million households. We're at 25 at Kraft Heinz, so we got a ways to go. But how we start to understand the interests and intersection of our brands with our retail partners and our media partners is going to be the critical piece to unlock. And some of those might be scale solutions. It might be the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl. Some of them might be much smaller, and we might choose to do, baloney face masks with Ulta. So how we think about that is very different. And, to Neil's point, we have brands like Oscar Mayer which, are multi-billion dollars, one or two in their categories they play in, bacon, bologna, deli meats, and what have you. And then we have small niche players, right? We make Weiler's bouillon cubes, which I don't think people would really think about, and how we bring those to life and how we think about earned media and social media and influencers as an accelerator for some of those brands, as well as our larger brands, is really important. And so, for us, it's really about thinking about when the right moment is. And then the last piece, and the benefit of a scale company, I as someone that's responsible for a portfolio of brands, we can't continue to just advertise brands individually as well. And so how we think about pulling them together to be more consumer oriented is another way that we start to think about using our media dollars differently. So we have Philadelphia cream cheese, we have Oscar Mayer bacon, we make Maxwell House coffee. Let's have a conversation about breakfast, shall we? We have cheese and ketchup and mustard. Let's talk about burgers, and really thinking from a consumer lens about what they want to hear and where they want to hear it is how we're trying to adjust our media spend versus looking at, traditional versus digital as a construct.
That's great. Thank you. Hey, Alyssa, I'm going to turn this question to you. We have a question from Anthony Jackal. And this relates to sort of career navigation and how you prioritize things. So, and based on what you said of moving from large to small to large company, the question is, when trying to grow as a better, more successful marketing leader, do you feel there's higher value in doing marketing at various companies or industries, or taking on different roles outside of marketing, whether it's in sales or finance, finance like Dave, insights, et cetera, that would make you a more well-rounded business leader and marketer?
Alyssa, before you answer, is this the Anthony Jackal that left me at Kraft Heinz for that same specific reason?
I believe that could be it.
Great question. And I think the answer is super personal. So like Dave, when you were sharing your experience, the fact that you had finance as one of your key initial experiences, then probably was one of the things that got you from CMO to CEO, which is, an impressive step. For me personally, marketing's always been my passion. I grew up, my dad was a marketer, my husband was a marketer, like marketing was my jam. There was nothing else I wanted to do. And so the trade-offs for doing something that you wouldn't enjoy as much, for me wasn't personally worth it. But I know lots of people who I absolutely adore and admire, and they want to be GM. And so for them, taking a rotation in sales or taking a rotation in an operations role or supply chain is super important if you want to be able to have a holistic view of the total organization, so you can do a role like a CEO. For me, from my moves, there's trade-offs for big orgs and small orgs. And then for the big orgs, there's orgs that are marketing led versus orgs that are trying to be marketing led. So if you want to have a strong career in marketing, I would make sure you're spending time in an organization that's known for grooming marketing leaders and marketing talent. And you can ask anybody on this panel, like, who are some of those organizations? You can look at who are CMOs across different roles and where did they grow up? Look at their LinkedIn profile. It's easy to see, like, where did they spend time to learn how to become a marketing leader? And there's, P&G is a great example. PepsiCo is one too, and one of the reasons I went to PepsiCo. And then look at what you want to build in terms of your total tool chest. So for me, I like learning and marketing, learning organizations like PepsiCo or P&G. And then I want to cut my teeth at being able to do not whatever I want, but a little bit right at a startup, because you're able to, maybe you don't have the budget or the resources, but you can try more things more quickly because you don't have a matrix large organization. And so your learnings are different in those two types of organizations. So just be thinking about what are the different tool sets, skill sets that you want to learn, and go after it. For me, my litmus test, I was given great advice early in my career where it said every 3 months, review whether you have learned incremental differentiating skill sets in the, in the function or the career that you want to have. If the answer is no, wait another 3 months. And then you have to raise your hand for a different experience internally or additional project or something like that internally that will get you additional skill sets that are outside your current skill set, or start looking somewhere else. And that's not the career advice for everybody without question, but for me personally, as I looked at my career, I'd always keep an eye on when am I hitting diminishing returns to the incremental learnings that I have. And as soon as I felt like I was not really learning that much more, I would start exploring, okay, what do I want to do next? Where do I see the interesting skill sets, marketing, innovation happening? And then I'd go after that. And it actually ties back to what you were saying, Sanjiv, in terms of retail media, right? When I was CPG, you don't actually own the first party data. And as soon as I got to retail, I was like, ooh, I have a lot of first party data. Step one, make sure we're leveraging it for our own marketing dollars versus not, which we weren't 4 years ago, but now are. And then how do we partner with people that have dollars? So I'm not just getting their shopper marketing budget, but I'm able to tap into their brand marketing budget because I'm able to prove how I can actually drive their sales. And that's become a massive business model. Amazon started with AWS, Walmart. Brian Cornell was talking about Target and Roundel this morning on CNBC. We have Walgreens advertising group. So there's a lot of innovation happening in that space. And then the next cornerstone of that's agency, right? And how agency plays into that whole ecosystem. But the net of it is, as soon as I'm getting bored or feel like I'm not learning my skill set, I look at what's the next experience I want to have. And I have in mind, Dave, to your point, it's not orchestrated perfectly, but like, where do I think I want to go? And how do I enjoy spending my time so that I'm actually enjoying what I'm doing versus feeling drained by what I'm doing? And then I go after that. And I think the one thing to know is everybody's always willing to spend time with you in terms of career management and career advice. And everyone's always looking for really good people. So try to be the best at what you're doing. And when you want to have career conversations, reach out. I've never had somebody reach out to me in my organization or outside my organization and say that they want to talk about career or want to talk about how they can grow. And I've never turned them down. I enjoy that conversation over a lot of the other meetings I'm in during the day. No offense to meetings. And so always feel comfortable raising your hand, especially when you've been able to deliver great work, right? The senior leaders that you've delivered the great work to, reach out and be like, hey, really enjoyed that conversation. Do you mind grabbing a coffee, whether it's a, virtual coffee or whatnot, and people take you up on it without question.
That's great. Thanks. So I'll tell you what, we spent a good amount of time so far talking about the experiences that got you to the roles that you're in. I'd like to just shift a little bit for a moment on the steps that you've taken once you were in your leadership roles, your C-suite roles. And so the first one is, I think, Dave, I would ask you to identify both in your current role, but also with application for, first roles upon graduation. What are the steps that you took to ensure your success in that role? And I would ask you to frame it this way in your current role, but also how that relates to the first job you had upon graduation.
Yeah, I think it's really come back to a desire to learn and to really try to understand whatever you're working on even better. And so in my case, as I stepped into this CEO role in June, I'd been with the company at that point for over 7 years. So I knew the company well, but I knew there was also a lot that I didn't know. And the world, of course, has changed a lot, in particular over these last 2 years. So my first set of activities was just spending time with the team across the company. I met with every officer in the company. I met with every region, spent time in stores, went to our distribution centers, spent time with each of our corporate teams. I had been in marketing and merchandising, so I knew that well, but still dove in with them, but also other functions that I'd worked with but hadn't had, and really through that both learned a lot, understood more of our opportunity ahead, but also deepened relationships and connections, some of which I'd had for a while, others were newer, but that idea of just really diving in and learning, and everybody on this call is smart and I guess must be very curious and interested, or it wouldn't be in this program. Leverage that. I go back to my first role at P&G. I came into that without I was an intern, fortunate enough to get an intern, ship there, again, with no marketing background at all. Taken some courses in my first year of graduate school. And so I really dove in. I learned. I asked people, like Alyssa said, you talk to people that are very open. And I found things that I could lean on, that I had strength in. And so in my case, what I discovered early in my first job at P&G is, we were set up. We had a general manager that ran a good part of the beauty. I was in beauty, and I went into beauty not on purpose, or you don't really get an option. They just slot you into different categories.
It was a foreshadow of things to come.
Well, right. I kind of a big circle back to beauty, but I started in beauty, and so the general manager there, she was amazing and just really smart. Understood marketing, of course. Understood general management, and so I wasn't going to. I could learn a lot from her for marketing, but I probably wasn't going to set the agenda. But what I discovered early is the one thing I could provide to her, not that she wasn't capable of understanding dynamics like market share dynamics and what was happening in different parts of the country. She just didn't have. So I found early, it just was one of the things that I just by me taking a lot of time to dive into, I was working on Noxzema, as I mentioned. What's happening in Noxzema? Where are pockets of strength? What markets are we doing well? What consumer are doing? Is just work, like diving in, doing the analytics, understanding where the opportunity is, and then sharing that. I found that that was something that I knew I had some strength in. I brought some analytical capabilities, so I leaned on that and tried to add value, to find a place where I could add some value early, but also was tried to be a sponge. And so I'd encourage everybody, whether you're stepping into your first job, or in my case, stepping into a CEO role, just realize that you for sure don't have the answers. Lean into what you're bring some strength into. And I, like when I stepped into the CEO role, I knew I had some strengths that I could lean on, that I was really comfortable with, but I also was open to learning and asking questions, relying on others, and bringing, building those relationships to, strengthen our collective impact. And so I guess if there's one thing, I think be open to learning, be very clear. Nobody's expecting you to come in to be the absolute expert, particularly in your first job, but, find what you're really, really passionate about. If you're really, you spend a lot of time understanding social media, bring some of those experiences, or if you're more analytical, or whatever your strengths are, lean into those, demonstrate some value, and then but be open to learning along the way.
That's great. Thank you.
I think
I'm going to turn. Go ahead, Sanji.
Just to build for a second, I think the interesting thing about Dave's talking about is the idea that empathy and insights are always going to be valuable experiences, right? So as you transition through a leadership journey or a marketing journey or whatever, having consumer and customer and team empathy, and then striving for an insight that you can then elevate to whomever in the organization, either how you think about your role or you think about your manager's needs. But there's a opportunity, I think, for people to be more empathetic in a highly polarized, atomized world, and to really be great at telling stories about insights, because I think that's how you gain understanding. That's how you drive action. And I think that, just listening to Dave and reflecting on first party data envy, those are the spaces where I think there's huge opportunity.
Yeah, so just as a tag on, I wanted to ask you, and then I have a question for Ed in just a moment, but I wanted to ask you, Sanjiv, based on what Dave just shared. Dave had the ability to move into a new role, a significant role, but having some momentum already with the company. You, on the other hand, go into a huge role in a brand new company. And I think it'll be really helpful just to hear a little bit of texture, just to sort of compare and contrast a little bit about what you've had to do to not only establish yourself, but to get the business moving in a way that it can.
Yeah, I think I went from a relatively small company, right? I had a marketing team of 40 people at Mark Anthony, to a massive organization with a team of 350, and the iterant complexities of that, and also coming into an organization that, if you read enough headlines from 2 or 3 years ago about Kraft, Heinz, had a very specific strategy that didn't work and was in a period of transformation and reset. And at the same time, I started remotely. I didn't meet anybody at the company. So in person, all of my conversations for a year were like this. And I think that's why I sort of leaned in and honed in on Dave's point to talk about empathy, because the way that you drive a transformation or you get people to change behaviors in a company that's in dire need of changing its behaviors, and I think everyone will acknowledge the company's on a transformation journey, is to be empathetic. What are the problems? What are the things that are blocking you from going to be this way? And then helping people clear those roadblocks was a major part of the role, and then illuminating those challenges to the rest of the organization so that the impetus and agenda for change would be one that was embraced by the broader organization. And then I think the second part is understanding how an organization works and where the decisions were. And I think I came from a place that was naturally less siloed, that was much more entrepreneurial. I think, as many of you guys have worked at smaller, more entrepreneurial companies where decisions just move. And to go into a place where decisions cycle just by the nature of the machine is challenging, but understanding the levers and how to use informal communications to try to drive change was a big part of that process. Throughout the whole thing, one of the things that I reflected on is I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to hear the CEO of Twitter speak about the scaling of the company from basically zero revenue to where it went. And, he said that the one challenge of a scaled business is that you go from a bias to yes to a bias to no. And you saw that. I saw like overnight coming from a company that had a bias to yes to a company that really had a bias to no. And so encouraging, supporting, building trust, all of those things will be and continue to be instrumental in changing how the business is and how we think about marketing to consumers.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Ed, a question for you. You've been in your position for a decent amount of time, not forever by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm curious, how have the expectations changed since you were first in your current role? And that includes, by the way, the pandemic, but overall, I'm curious if you could address that and some of the things that you're doing to keep Planet Fitness strong and vibrant.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me was I started at Planet Fitness in June of 2019. So the company had some crazy amount of consecutive growth, right? Since for a long time, the company was on a trajectory that was just unbelievable. And it was a roller coaster going from there to all of a sudden all of our locations shutting down on March 17th. So in the beginning, the model was not that complicated, right? We have, great gyms, $10 a month, and clean environments, judgment free. I mean, very simple model to market and put out there. When the pandemic hit, it was a dramatic shift, right? Because now you're competing against fear. And how can you, tell a story about, yes, we're still delivering those things we say we stand for and we were delivering before, but now we're creating a safe environment for consumers to come in and work out in the middle of a pandemic, which is still going on, even though the mask and the vaccine mandate has been lifted in a lot of places. But the expectations changed. I mean, I really had to work very closely with our operations team to understand everything they were doing to keep the gym environment safe and find out a way to tell that story in a way to consumers where they felt safe to go back into gyms. And we're still telling that story. Also, in that short amount of time, the one thing the pandemic did, and it accelerated a lot of things. It accelerated the spotlight on wellness and what does wellness mean and how is fitness a part of wellness. So, going to the gym, you think fitness, I want to be in shape, I want to look a certain way, but going to the gym, being in contact with people, working out, is really a part of the wellness equation in terms of you mentally, and what working out and movement means to people mentally. So in a short amount of time, it shifted from a very simple message, simple model, to now navigating through a pandemic where safety and fear are the big things that are driving consumers, to then thinking about the mental aspect. I mean, that's, when you think about, that's not even 3 years, dramatic shifts in our model and expectations of the stories we have to convey as a brand to our consumers.
That's great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to shift gears for just a moment. Alyssa, I have a question for you, and this relates to you and your role with Walgreens. I remember the very first conversation that I had with you shortly after the pandemic began, where you were taking on a significant role, particularly given given the fact that Walgreens was an essential business. So this is a question that anybody can answer, but I wanted to start with Alyssa for sure. But what steps have you taken, has Walgreens taken, to adapt to the evolving needs as a leader that could include DEI, employee mobility, purpose, et cetera? So I'd love to hear a bit about how you're evolving given some of the nuances today and the realities today that are set.
Yeah. It's interesting because when the pandemic first started, and Walgreens was an essential service, we have 400,000 team members globally, so keeping them safe was really, really important. And we serve a lot of customers that have chronic conditions, right? Which were one of some of the people that we wanted to protect the most. And this was before COVID testing, before giving out the vaccine, all of which were also really important. So when it started, I was on the president's task force for COVID leading customer care, which included marketing, comms, digital products, solutions for being able to shop through drive-through, all the way to rolling out the testing and the vaccine. It was interesting because at first I was excited to have a purpose in the pandemic and be able to lead a team with a purpose. After 15 months, I was like, can I just take a vacation, please? But what was nice about it, though, we've talked a lot about big organizations versus small organizations today, is that we met every single day as a very cross-functional team to talk about what needed to happen right now, which meant we could unlock so much more than going through our typical governance, which was great. If you fast forward then to today, the world's changed forever. The workforce has changed for forever. Where I get the most passionate is 2 areas. One is DE&I, and the other is workplace flexibility. The first, because everybody clearly needs to prioritize that right now. For us, from a health equity perspective, it's even more important. And how can we dig into not just talking about it at a high level, but really digging into where are some of those inequities, and what are tangible things that we can be doing to help drive more equity. So I think that's a space I spent a ton of time, and just spending time talking to people and talking to team members and the patients they serve. The amount of learning that you get, and empathy, to the point that's made before, is so much more than reading an article or watching something on TV. So really just spending time with people that are impacted in ways that you wouldn't see if you didn't make that effort, I think is massively critical. Workplace flexibility is also an area of massive interest to me. When I look at what my schedule used to be like versus what it is today, I'm an early bird, but I used to wake up at 4 so I could get to the office, beat traffic and get to the office by 7:30, and then I would get home after the kids had already had dinner. And so to compare that to, first of all, it was really nice when there was no traffic at all, and it took 30 minutes to get to work, compared to, having to avoid traffic, and it can take up to 2 hours and 15 minutes. But there's just an amount of flexibility that now I can deliver what I want to deliver from a work perspective, but then also not miss out on, my kids' lives. And I think that's true for all team members. I think the other thing that happens is that people still have a ton of volatility in their lives, right? Even if your kids are older in school, something happens and they have to work, take school from home. Like there's tons of volatility that's still out there. And so maintain flexibility so that you can manage that volatility and being a great team member. My team, I'm so proud of how my teams come together in terms of people being impacted by different things and other team members covering for them while they're working through what they're impacted. And then, taking care of other team members when it's their time to take care of other team members. And so I think there's a lot of just under safety with Ukraine right now, right? I have, team members from both Ukraine and Russia, and just knowing that it's not, everybody's not always okay, and that's fine, but just having empathy and supporting each other, I think has made for a much more overall empathetic workforce. But trying to force what was an old model, based on a totally different family dynamic compared to what there is today, I just don't think it's the answer. And I think there's a lot more that we can unlock with the flexibility that we have today. And just think about it. I mean, we're all doing this conference virtually. We want to do in person. Person's great. I love in person, but it's nice to be able to have different tools so that we can remain flexible, so that we can deliver what we want to deliver both in our professional and in our personal lives, and be able to do that for our team members and cross-functional, partners as well.
Yeah, I had a dog barking, so I figured I'd put myself on mute for a second. For those of you that don't know me, that's not unusual.
We've all become button masters.
Exactly. So Dave, I just wanted to ask, just given the nature of your organization, if there's anything that you would add to that, but while you're thinking, I do want to pose a question. You assumed the CEO role. Again, you had some running momentum in your leadership roles with the company, but Mary Dillon is extraordinary. And she established incredible culture, great success for the organization. And now you're, picking up the reins and you're building an even stronger culture and doing that in a pandemic. So I'd love to hear, not only some of the nuances of today that Alyssa was addressing in terms of, employee mobility and DEI and so on, but what are some of the things that you're doing to strengthen a culture in this environment?
Well, it's so important, and I just agree with it. Really, everything Alyssa was talking about, the changing dynamics that are going on, and as leaders, all of us are actively thinking about how we evolve the way we want to work, the way we show up in the world around us, the focused priorities, the culture that we're creating. It's always been important, but when there's been such massive disruption, it's critical that we are thinking in very different ways. Yeah, and it's just a little bit more. Yeah, so I stepped in as, for those that don't, there's Mary Dillon was CEO for about 8 years. She hired me in. I've worked with her actually at 2 other companies, so I've known her for a long time. And she is, awesome, and had done so much to establish the culture at Ulta Beauty, and still is. She's her legacy continues to play an important part of who we are. And so when I came in, it was important for me to both recognize and celebrate the positive impact that she had, but also to understand that whether she was here or I was here, we had to evolve, we had to change, and there's such dramatic things going on, and if we just sat still, then we weren't going to be successful. And for us, like I think probably every company, all the companies on this call, culture is so important. In every business, every company. I haven't been here for 8 years. I'm so proud of the marketing strategies we put in, and the merchandising and the supply chain work that we've done, but the attention that we paid to the culture and the way we want to work together and the values that we share and the mission that we're on together, I think that was the most important work that we did by far. If we hadn't done it in a way, and I think it's true in any company, it's really true in retail, when we have not as many as Walgreens, we have 40,000 people that are showing up every day delivering an experience for Ulta. And if they aren't inspired and connected and passionate, you'll know, our guests will know, right? If the stylist cutting your hair is not committed or connected or passionate about the work that they do, then it's going to show up. So I've been really focused on culture and certainly stepping in this role. And with these changes, Alyssa talked about some of the way we want to work. We're thinking about a lot of the same things. It's not going to look the way it did in the past. Although 4 a.m. is impressive. So that's, yeah, right. Yeah.
I thought for sure she was going to say that she was actually riding the Peloton for 90 minutes before.
Right. Yes, I got it.
60,
Right.
actually, 60 minutes, not 90.
Right.
There's nothing like a high achiever. Okay.
Yeah, I thought I got up early, not 4 a.m. But a couple of things I would just highlight. Two things that I think are really important. Let's talk about one of them in detail, and that's diversity, inclusion, equity, and that's important for everybody. And then I know, at least I did, and I think many through the events of the last couple of years have seen that as much as we had tried to accomplish before 2020, we realized we needed to do more. And for us in beauty, it's particularly, we think we have an important role. It's important everywhere. We think it's important in beauty because how you express yourself to the world, the way you choose to show up, the individual nature of beauty, the fact that everybody is beautiful and that you, and then we're here to help celebrate that, to bring that to life in your own personal way, in an environment that often there are unattainable, views of what beauty should be. And so we see a really unique role, an important role that we play in breaking down some of those barriers to bring to life what we call, we say at Ulta, you don't come to Ulta to get beautiful, you come because you already are. And our job is to just help you bring your self-expression to life. And so diversity is inherent in that, and diversity is inherent in beauty. And so everything we do, from the assortment to the training we do in stores, to the training we do in our corporate team, to the communication we bring to celebrate underrepresented voices in our marketing and in all different programs that we have, the hiring that we do. We've been doing, I think, a good job at that. We really said we've got to do more because of the role that we play. And so that's important. The other thing I'd just quickly highlight is sustainability. With everything, with all the challenges that we face as a society and on the globe, there isn't one individual solution, but we've recognized the importance that we can contribute positively. We know our associates expect it of us, and our guests expect it of us, and so we've been pushing hard to. One of the big challenges in beauty is waste. Packaging isn't always recycled or recyclable. Because a bunch of dynamics going on there, but so we've been pushing hard on that. How do we reduce all the waste? How do we reduce energy in our stores? So, but there's these challenges that we're facing in society. I think maybe historically weren't top of mind. They are now. Every leader is I think doing their best, and certainly what we're trying to do at Ulta is make sure we're making positive progress on this journey across a number of fronts.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of the session. I have 3 questions there, and I want to treat this like a speed date. Okay, and I know Sanjiv, you've never been on one, but trust me, this is going to be fun. So the first question, and I would ask that each one of you offer up to 3, and if you feel really compelled, go to 4. And they can be different. They can be the same or different. It's up to you. But the first question is, what do you see as the most important emerging skills for marketing and communications professionals today and moving forward? And I'm going to start with Ed.
I think some of the biggest emerging skills is really understanding culture and what's moving people. And I know that's a broad statement and it's an art to that, but we're in a society now that there are movements happening, and you have to be able to tap into that. And that takes being out there, meeting different people, talking to people about, what they're excited about, in their societies, what kind of movements they're getting behind. And then it all being powered right now by technology. I mean, tech is driving our industry, and it's moving so fast and constantly evolving. I mean, from automation to commercialization of social platforms, to CRM becoming smarter and more intuitive as much as possible, and how that's driving your overall MarTech. And then look what's happening now with the metaverse and NFTs. I mean, we're talking about a short amount of time that technology, along with culture, has really moved our society in a way that I've never seen move before. We're moving extremely fast. So those are my two things, is really around the art of understanding culture and what's cool and what makes people excited. And then how is that powered, and how we can enable that to be empowered by technology.
Okay, so now I have to go to Alyssa, because you are cool. So what are your answers to that?
People leadership is massive. The talent supply is much lower than demand. And so making sure that people leadership's there, I think, is absolutely key. Otherwise you'll feel like you're running on a treadmill. Not that that's bad. Not that running's bad, but anyway, people leadership I think is key. Completely agree with technology. It's amazing what the amount of time I spend on MarTech, data lakes, IP warming, your big partners like Adobe and Microsoft Azure, but also your smaller partners for us like Phrasing Movable Ink that help you do more in the AI and ML space. I didn't know any of that when I started marketing. So that's the second space. And the third would be learning. We talk about empathy for the consumer. There's also empathy for your cross-functional partners. So for me, that's understanding what drives pharmacy, what drives pharma, what drives merchandising, what drives store operations, so that you can figure out how you're the best partner, because otherwise you're going to just be trying to sell your marketing story versus actually building cross-functionally.
That's great. Jeev.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it boils down to kind of three areas. One is the idea that we are not marketers, we're entrepreneurs. We have to be willing to try things, and we have to be okay with failure. I think that, all of the stories of business today are stories of entrepreneurs, and they're great marketers. I think that, to Edward's point on technology, the pace of disruption is incredibly high. And so how you can embrace a disruptive mindset yourself and be ready for not just the disruptions that are coming at you, but to be comfortable disrupting yourself, which can be hard when you have routines and you have responsibilities and you get the rituals of your workday and the rhythm of your life. And then the last one is tied to creativity. I feel like, we talk about talent, we talk about skill sets. Oftentimes, I think looking outside of yourself and finding a new way to put things together is something that, I have had the pleasure of watching my kid go from the age of 1 to the age of 3. If he can figure out how to put Legos together in different ways, I think we can all take time and learn how to make that part of our own routine and bring that type of creativity into our work. And I think that those are some recipes for success.
Yeah, big difference between plumbing and poetry, right?
Yeah.
Dave.
So I think all of that is, there's such a dynamic time, and I think those I took some notes there because it's just great advice. The thing I talk about a lot with our team at Ulta is, for me, leading with your heart, starting with simple care, compassion, authenticity, inclusivity. If you start there, if you start with just a desire to connect and be authentic, bring who you are, recognize that everyone is coming from a positive place in most instances, leading with your heart as you do all of the technical expertise and functional experiences that you bring. I've just found so many great things come. It's certainly how the leaders that have been most inspiring to me have led. And so, and I think it's even more true now, given all the disruption. So I just focus on that. A simple idea of care, compassion, and authenticity is really important.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to ask you, I've heard about, or better said, I'm going to ask each one of you, you get one answer for each of these questions really quick. Same order. Okay, Ed, your single biggest and most significant professional highlight of your career to date, and how you think you'll answer the question in 5 years.
Well, I think, The big things in my career that I reflect on that excited me and were the things that I was doing to help people, the brands I was working with. When I was at Nike, Chicago, which still is being devastated by gun violence, especially in the African-American communities. At the time I was with Nike, we had the opportunity to bring World Basketball Festival, which completely made up by Nike, but it's this celebration of basketball and everything that comes with it, not just with the sport, but the culture of sport and the heroes that emerge from it. And we pitched that, being based here in Chicago, we pitched that to the global and North America team to bring the festival here to Chicago on the South Side, because the city was and still is in a crisis. When you think about how many people are being shot and killed every day here. So we were able to bring the World Basketball Festival here. We brought the whole US Olympic team. We brought all these inspirational speakers. We transformed the South Side into really the world basketball mecca. And just seeing the impact that had on kids in particular, and especially kids in the neighborhoods that I grew up in, was very powerful for me. And I'll never forget that overall. And then the second part of your question is next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next 5 years. I mean, I hope I can continue to do the same. I mean, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. As an African-American man, there are not many of us where I am today. So I want to continue, helping my community, helping other young professionals succeed in their career, whether they want to be a CMO, be at the C-suite level, or whatever it is. I want to make sure whatever I'm doing and from where I'm doing it and with the brands I'm doing it are helping our communities. And for me, the big thing is diversity, bringing talent, diverse talent into the organizations I'm a part of. And even if it's not with the organization I'm a part of, helping them wherever they want to go. That's what I want to keep doing in my career over the next 5 years.
Great, thank you. Alyssa?
Career highlight to date would be working at Walgreens to launch COVID testing and the vaccine. I don't know that when I started my career, I'd know, well, first of all, that would be in a global pandemic. And second of all, that I'd be able to be part of trying to help society the way we have. So that's been incredibly, incredibly rewarding. I hope that we're able to do what we've done for COVID-19 health across other conditions. I think we have an aging populations with baby boomers aging, millennials are now middle-aged. And so how can we, and this new sandwich generation, and so how can we leverage our digital tools as well as our store footprint to really take care of both those that are managing health conditions and those that are taking care of them. And I think that is something that is important to culture and motivates me a ton just because of my personal life.
Great, thank you. Sanjiv?
Those are incredibly deep and meaningful responses. So I'll offer a really shallow one as a career highlight. The opportunity to be part of White Claw Summer a few years ago, which was, I think one of the more insane or intense experiences of people talking about something that I was doing without any regard for my personal time. But I think, like, more importantly, and why I'm so passionate about the work at Kraft Heinz and where we're going is, I'm the child of immigrants, and for me, and growing up in this country where, brands like the ones that Kraft Heinz made, you bought because it meant that you were fitting in, and it was like a signal to my father that we were part of the American fabric. And I think as you think about what the world is, and the country is, and what these brands are, there's still inherent and great meaning in them, but they have to be redefined in the context of the world that we live in today, and the populations that we have, and the demographics of this country, and the challenges that we have, and how we can infuse a different type of purpose and a different type of meaning into these brands and take what they mean to create relevance and impact in communities. We talk a lot about essential workers and providing food as part of the supply chain was part of that. I certainly wasn't part of that. But one of the things that we talk about a lot is taking the term essential and turning it into indispensable. And how can these brands and how can these products become more meaningful to people beyond just what they see on the shelf, is something I'm very excited about.
Fantastic. And then Dave.
Great. So I'm really proud of what we accomplished at Ulta over the last, my time here in the last 5-10 years, taking what was a really good foundation, but through understanding consumer behavior, deeper connection to the world around us, and building a culture, it's driven a lot of success, and I'm really proud of that. But I think as I look forward for the next 5 years, what I'm going to be hopefully looking back on is that we took the strength and the foundation we had, and we drove even more positive impact for our team, for our guests, and for the world around us. And I think it's interesting as you just hear that theme. I think it's true across so many companies, and I think it's such a positive thing that corporations, big and small, are seeing the opportunity ahead, with trust being challenged in so many ways across our country and around the world. The one opportunity that we have as business leaders is find ways that we can fill that void of trust, create positive change, lean into things that historically maybe corporations hadn't focused as much attention on. And so if I look back 5 years from now, and we've made more progress on our efforts to be a positive impact and a positive provider of solutions to some of the challenges we're facing, I'll be really proud. The other thing that I wrote down is baloney face masks. And if we launch that and make that the biggest part of the category, Sanjiv, we'll do that together. So that's pretty exciting.
I'm happy to start a bidding war between you and Walgreens, and I will trade. I will trade shopper media dollars.
Yes, I like it. I like it.
I love it.
Fantastic. Well, listen, everybody, thank you. You're particularly on the last answers, and I'm not going to address the baloney face mask right now, but the last answers were, every one of you referenced unwavering success that you pointed to in terms of financial success and business success and so on. But I'm anticipating that that's a given as you move forward. But every one of you is highlighting making a difference in the community around you, and I think that speaks to your businesses, your brands, but also you. And I can't thank you enough on behalf of Medill IMC to be able to have you join the team. This conversation has been recorded, and I know it's going to be referenced multiple times throughout the student and alumni and faculty community. So I can't thank you enough. You guys are terrific. And with that, I am going to close the session. And everybody, I hope you have a great evening. Stay safe, and all the best.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks for this opportunity. Great meeting,
Yes.
everyone.
Thank you.
So much.
Sure.
Thanks. Bye.